And I thought, wait a second, I have this all wrong. I'm waiting for people to get frailer and weaker and need senior housing. What happens if I help them stay where they want to be, which is at home, and how they want to remain, which is well? What would it look like? And how do I take the best of what I've learned in senior housing and allow people to be their best? And that was the impetus for Vitality Society.
Hey y'all, it's Kosta. Today I'm here with my guest, Meredith Oppenheim, founder and CEO of Vitality Society, an online community designed to enrich, engage, and empower people 60 and better to remain at their best. Meredith proudly served on Mayor Bloomberg's Age-Friendly NYC Commission and the NYC Department for Aging Board during her decades as an executive in the senior housing industry, where she received a US Congressional Award for her service to seniors. Recently featured as a speaker at South by Southwest, Meredith's mission to create sustainable, long-lasting change in senior living is just getting started. So Meredith, as a long-term care provider, I can attest to the priorities we've placed on solving the issues of senior care and senior living, particularly in the past 10 years, and as we see the crest of the silver tsunami preparing to hit all of America. Today, we're talking about an equally important and often overlooked facet of aging: building community. As someone who's worked in this industry for the past 30 years, what brought you to this specific segment?
Well, first of all, Kosta, thank you so much for having me. A real treat to find kindred spirits in looking at this industry clarifully, costly, and creatively. So in sum, for me, I started my work with older people when I was in high school. I was very close with my grandparents, and their longevity and vitality became my priority. I loved them very much. I wanted them to be part of my life as long as possible. So I set out to cook for them. Their health improved by prioritizing healthier, more wholesome foods. And then I thought, well, that was interesting. My girlfriends went to go candy stripe at the hospital, take care of sick people. And I thought to myself, well, wait a second. What happens if I diverted my attention and put my heart and soul into cooking for other people so they remain well and out of the hospital? And so that began my lifelong mission of really prioritizing a generation that's older than me, although I'm getting closer and closer to age, right? I just turned 50 myself. But when I started this work when I was 15, I really had a very pure mission, which was to help my family and then help other people's family. And here I am decades later, still doing this work with the same urgency then that I feel now for my own parents.
And so between 15 and Vitality Society,
Yes.
What was your experience? I know it's a long time,
A
but
long time.
what was your experience like in between there? And did your perception and kind of how you perceived aging with regards to your grandparents, did it change at all when you went to work in senior living and in those environments?
Absolutely. So with my grandparents back in the 80s, the late 80s, I had to stand in front of rooms of seniors at local senior centers and try to convince them that eating better would help them live longer. It wasn't that they weren't interested, it was that they weren't informed.
Right.
And what we're seeing now, fast forward decades, is a generation of older person, the baby boomers, who are so inspired and so enlightened and so committed to living better, longer, healthier lives. So my journey in that continuum includes going to Harvard Business School and then working in the industry of senior housing for over 2 decades. And I always start with personal stories. It drives me professionally. So after working in the industry of senior housing for over 2 decades for some of the largest owners and operators, I had my own aha moment because my father was getting very ill with 2 blood diseases and 2 blood cancers.
Oh,
and
wow.
I said to my mom, I looked at her, she was his primary caregiver, and I said, when something happens to him, what am I going to do with you? And at the time, I was overseeing billions of dollars of real estate, some of the best senior housing properties that are out there. They're absolutely wonderful to look at and to be at.
Sure.
And my mom basically said, I'm never going to move to any of the communities you've ever been part of. And I said, how could
Wow.
that be? What are you looking for? She's like, it's not that. And I actually don't know. But if you're going to be the guru or at least part of this industry, you better be part of the solution.
Yes.
And so that was like a threat, right? She had said to me that it wasn't necessarily what she wanted. And she said something more specific to me. She said, and there's like 70 million of me. She's the oldest boomer.
Hmm.
And you don't have that much time to figure it out. So
Right.
for me, I felt very compelled to say to myself, okay, I saw the toll sickness took on my dad and the impact it had on my mom as a caregiver and my brother and myself. And I thought, wait a second, I have this all wrong. I'm waiting for people to get frailer and weaker and need senior housing. What happens if I help them stay where they want to be, which is at home, and how they want to remain, which is well? What would it look like? And how do I take the best of what I've learned in senior housing and allow people to be their best? And that was the impetus for Vitality Society.
So let's get into it. For anyone that isn't familiar with Vitality
Yeah,
Society and how the community operates, will you give us a brief overview of the
sure.
program and how we can get involved?
Absolutely. So Vitality Society was born after hours of focus groups in people's living rooms and surveys online. And what really I learned was the questions were about what do you value? What do you need? What do you want in this later next chapter of your life? And what ultimately came to be was that in the living rooms where I would do these focus groups, really what was most important and most interesting and satisfying was people just being together.
Hmm.
So I had this aha moment that it didn't matter what they were saying so much. It was what the relationships and connections that they were farming and cultivating together. And so that was really powerful to me, that this idea of staying connected with other people, this was pre-COVID, this was in 2019, was so meaningful and valuable to older people and frankly becomes harder to come by as you get older. And
Hmm.
then the second piece of this is everything that they had asked was, because I'm well right now, because we're well enough, until he's not well enough, everything that they had planned or wanted to do hinged on health. So the idea was, how do I create a community to keep people well? That was the goal. And so to answer your question, I distilled that down to 8 guiding principles. They're all 2-letter words. You want to be the best version of yourself, BE, do, DO, volunteer work. Ed, keep learning, go, travel, because that's what people really like. Then we had have a good time, hi, meet new people, and stay like calm. And then the last one's oi, because aging, like any other aspect of life,
Sure.
has many different obstacles and challenges that one has to overcome. So the idea really came to be is like, how do I activate those principles and get people engaged to stay well? And so what we did was online programming. We have it 7 days a week. It's recorded and live, and people come together live on Zoom, do classes with some of the premier fitness, wellness, and enrichment coaches. And we do everything we can to stimulate their minds. So we just came off of art history. So my mom, she teaches our art history classes. And so our members love it. We're going into virtual travel in December. So I changed the theme of the Sunday night programming, but otherwise, like appointment style viewing when we were younger, we have a set program and we do that 7 days a week. So our members design their lives around our classes so they can incorporate it into their routines. And so that has worked really well. There's a lot of friendships that have formed and blossomed, those that live in the same city and those that live states apart. It's really beautiful and wonderful to see people posting on their Facebook or sending in a picture to us. Look who I met. Look what we're doing. I really believe that we're giving them the strength, stamina, and stability to do all that they want at this stage of life. And that's very empowering to them and very exciting to us.
How many states are you guys in?
Oh my God, I haven't looked recently. I would say maybe 80% of the states.
Oh,
So
wow.
to get involved is very easy. It's a subscription service. We
Sure.
try to keep it very reasonable. People pay up to $30 a month. We often run promotions.
That's great.
But the idea is it's a subscription service. My commitment to our community is that they commit to us. So
Yeah.
by making it a subscription service rather than a series of videos or LinkedIn classes happening at, Zoom classes happening at random times. Like, we're committing to our members, they're committing to each other and us. And so that has paid off in spades for us. And this is our pilot program, and it has worked. And now we're getting ready, hopefully, for phase 2.
And I will say that social isolation for a lot of people who are getting older is, I mean, it's a terrible thing that can happen to them, because they kind of lose that will and that sense of connection, and obviously the sense of community that you've been talking about. And so the fact that, especially in this new world that we live in post-pandemic, people that are able to access through virtual communication,
Yep.
and experience things virtually, it allows them to build that sense of community. And that community may not always be physical. It can be online. It can be across states, and obviously if it's close by, then they can always go out and get a cup of coffee or what have you. One thing that you've been talking about that I want to expand on is kind of age and vitality. You have a distinction between the two. So for our listeners, what's the difference between someone's age and their vitality?
Oh, that's a great question. So when we were on ABC News in New York City, the reporter who I adore, he called vitality like your get up and go, right? Your
Nice.
ability to be engaged and excited in all that is around you and surrounds you. Your age is just a number, Kosta, right? I cannot believe this, but it's so true. When I started the company, I was 47, and it's the beginning of COVID, and we were all stuck inside. So I'd do a lot of the classes with our members, and my arms were like burning. And then you had these most extraordinary 70-year-old women who had like 3-pound weights, and I had no weights, right? So
Yeah.
age is really just a number. And let's be clear, we're not trying to defy aging, right? Aging is a natural process that we're all going to progress through, and some of us more easily or happily than others. But what we're trying to do is, I think of it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this idea of self-actualization. And as you progress in your lifespan, you have this unique opportunity to fully actualize and realize all that you have been preparing or wanting to do. So this is your chapter. This is your time. And when I give my talks at Harvard Business School and I'm teaching at NYU, that is the emphasis. Like, this is the opportunity that is ahead of you. And this is what is possible for you. What we do on Vitality Society is we want to give you that get up and go and that ability to do it successfully. And if you're not feeling well, you can't do much. So the idea is vitality is about kind of being able to feel physically and mentally at your best so you can get up and go. Frankly, at any age or any stage, it just happens to be the people we serve have a little bit more time, perhaps, than the generation that I'm part of, where we're stretched pretty thin in terms of raising children, working, thinking about our parents. Like, that is not necessarily the most opportunistic time to be fully actualized. But when you get into those later decades in life, it's a winning, wonderful opportunity.
The sandwich generation.
Yes, yes. And
It is tough.
here we are, right? I remember when I started working in senior housing in 2001, 2, right out of Harvard Business School, we were talking about like the adult children, and they're like these women that are 45 and older. And I thought to myself, oh my God, those women, they're stretched so thin. It's so difficult. Yeah. And that was when I was 28, and it happened like that. So here exactly.
I am. I am curious, before we move on, when you look at, there's 70 million people that are in the baby boomer generation. You've been doing this for about 3 years. Do you feel like there is optimism in terms of people being able to age with vitality? And the reason that I bring that question up is because there's a lot of challenges that people who are aging face. And a lot of it is income challenges for them to be able to afford to eat healthy meals. So many people are living in environments where they may not be able to get their basic needs met. And so when you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and self-actualization being at the top, there's also obviously the fundamentals, which is
Yes.
housing and other aspects as well. From your experience doing this for 3 years, do you feel like as a society as a whole, are we doing enough to be able to meet the needs of people who are aging so that they can age with vitality?
Oh, I think we could always do more, right? I think as you said in the introduction, I mean, I worked for the New York City Department for Aging, and I sat on their nonprofit board, and I was on Mayor Bloomberg's Age Friendly Commission for a number of years. So I've always professionally, in my paid positions, worked in the private sector, but sadly, the majority of people are in one way, shape, or form struggling in some way, right? There is, as you know, our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, and you alluded to it before, social isolation kills. So even if you have sufficient funds to age successfully, doesn't mean you're doing it in a community or part of connected with any other people. So that is just an atrocity that afflicts a lot of older people. But there's no question, as you alluded to, at the base of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, are those basic needs met? And as a country, we can do so much more. I was just in Washington, D.C., in a room full of people who were there for brain health and talking about food as medicine. Frankly, a more affordable form of medicine than most drugs and other interventions that are required for people who get sick. So they were talking about 3 different senators were there, Klobuchar, Booker, and Gillibrand, and they were all in the room at different times. So I had no idea that they coordinated what they were saying, but ultimately what they were all saying was that our healthcare system is broken, right? That we have a system where we spend 1 out of 3 taxpayer dollars on healthcare. Our country spends more than 2 times of any other wealthy nation, and our life expectancy is the shortest and shrinking. And so we are in a situation where unless we help everybody at the base of the pyramid succeed in terms of getting proper food, proper nutrition, proper connection, like no other part of the pyramid is possible. So, I feel very strongly that the food of medicine movement, that's how I began my work, right? I began that in high school where I wasn't as educated and enlightened as I am now. But I was equally motivated. And at that time, going into the areas of aging, the offices on aging, I mean, these were the organizational, boots on the ground, open the doors to anybody who can come in, have a meal, have connection, and then take part of the transportation home. But I learned, in this working with the city government, it's obviously very costly and complicated to be able to transport people to ensure that healthy meals are delivered appropriately and safely. So it's a problem that will plague our country and affect every generation if we don't take care of the oldest generation.
And so I may be answering the next question for you before I get to it, but I wanted to just touch on one more thing. I believe, since 80% of people want to age in place, what you've been able to build is actually going to and has the potential of solving a lot of that social isolation that people have from aging in place. I mean, it's like you were talking about with your mom. Like, it doesn't matter how nice or aesthetically pleasing the environments that you were working in are, she wants to age in her own home. But a lot of those instances come with their own set of pitfalls. And so I'm excited to see how this company, your company, evolves over time. I want to talk about the baby boomer generation as a whole first. So the baby boomer generation is known for completely demolishing every trend and tradition in their
redefining the rules.
Exactly.
As my mother said, we are not going to do what you say or say what you do. We're going to do it our own way in our own way. Yeah.
So as they're getting older and starting to shape the landscape of what retirement and life past 65 looks like to them, how do you think communities like Vitality Society plays into the new way we age?
I'm trying to solve for that daily. Well, I mean, we are a virtual solution. So I
Right.
think, as you have mentioned in the last question, there's no question that there's segmentation of this society, right? So one size will never fit all. There's no question about it. But in terms of where we fit into the broader landscape is if 90% of older people don't move into senior housing. And when they do move in, they're moving in later and frailer. That leaves decades of one's life to how do you take care of yourself? How do you connect with other people? So I just got off the phone with a friend of mine, two friends today, actually, interestingly enough. One of them, they're both in their early 50s and they had children earlier. So they're empty nesters.
Wow.
And,
That's incredible.
and then I have our members who I met one of them this summer who's over 90 years old. She just celebrated her 93rd birthday. And she doesn't just take our classes, she teaches her own fitness classes.
That's fantastic.
Right. So like this idea of where Vitality Society fits in, we're a virtual community. And I believe that we succeed when we give people that physical and mental strength, that get up and go, that they can do anything that they otherwise want to do.
Yes.
So we don't want to be necessarily the solution of people who are tethered to their houses and limited to what they only can see within their space and place. I really believe that if we do what we are trying to do well, we'll give them the strength, we'll give them the stamina, we'll give them the stability, and moreover, the friendships and the opportunities to go and see and be all they want to be. And so that to me is how we fit in. We're a piece of the puzzle. We're not the panacea.
Yeah.
I think we're a portion, and I think we're a meaningful and valuable piece of it. We have many members who also travel quite a bit, right? Whether they're visiting family or for, and this dovetails with what we saw in the research, people want to use this period of time to travel and to go. And while they're well enough to go all these places that they have wanted to go to or they couldn't get to during COVID. So, I think there's this opportunity that the virtual version really works because whether someone's in California with their kid or in Chicago with a sister or at home in Pennsylvania, it doesn't matter. And then another beautiful piece of what we do is we have a lot of members that are sisters, cousins, mother, daughters. So now they get to take these classes together. And despite where they live, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So that's something that you could never have done before. So I think we're a piece of the puzzle. We're not a panacea for the problem.
Have you seen instances where people take your classes and their chronic illness or their disability actually improves to the point to where they may be able to go back to driving or spend more time in grocery stores, spending more time out in the community?
Kosta, you're writing my business plan for me, or reinforcing what I plan on doing. So a lot of what we do is in the area and the lane, I would call it a prevention, right? Mm-hmm. So we really work hard to ensure that we give people a range of intensity in our classes and the types of classes that we offer, whether it be Tai Chi or yoga or strengthening or barefoot therapy class, head to toe workout, right?
Wow.
And so we are really focused on people remaining healthy and strong. That is our overarching goal. What's interesting is that the statistics of the percentage of the population 60 and older who are dealing with chronic illness, the last time I checked, it was 80% of people 60 and older are dealing with one. And I think at least 60% are dealing with two chronic diseases. Mm-hmm. And that could be hypertension, it could be heart, it could be diabetes. So these are diseases that in the past might have been obstacles for longevity. and successful living. But now people are able to manage these diseases in ways that they have never done before. And so I feel as Vitality Society, like we need to evolve and improve what we do. So it's not just about prevention, but if you think about what are the underlying conditions across all of these chronic diseases, it's what you eat and
Right.
how often you move or don't move, right?
Exactly.
So the idea is we're already dealing and doing, we've done a lot of work with nutrition. There's a lot of interest in nutrition in all of our offering whenever we offer it. And so the idea is like, those are the building blocks, and we need to make sure that we're not just supporting people from getting sick, but those who have sicknesses and illnesses, that we have a solution for them as well, because we will be a population of people who will be living longer than ever, managing more of these conditions because we know more, we can detect more, and now we have more interventions to stay alive longer. And so that's very exciting to me.
That's a through line in the entirety of the show, not just this one, but practically all the shows that I do. It's not just how old or what your age is in terms of the number. It's the quality of life.
That's
and
right.
it's a through line to what your company, the fundamentals to your company is. You want to improve the quality of life for people that are getting older so that they can live their best life or most independent life possible.
Yes,
So, yeah.
That's exactly right. And frankly, like there's so many dimensions of this, right? I think it's like, to me, it's like three legs of a stool. So you need the connection, you need to eat well, you need to move often. And so we try to deliver on all three. And for some people, let's be clear, they may have a ton of friends outside, but they just want to come to us to be able to move. Sure. And have a very efficient, convenient way to commit to an exercise program. And that's it.
That is fascinating. It's fascinating to me because you're not, so a lot of companies, they just focus on one leg, but you're focusing on all three and you're optimizing all three.
We try.
And so that's something that's different that I don't see from a lot of companies. Like most of them would be like, well, I'll create a social network and a sense of community, but I'm not going to also create fundamentals so that people can get stronger, more flexible through exercise and mobility exercises. But also the diet component. I think that's really interesting, and I'm curious to see. And I have a question at the very end that wasn't on the list, but I am going to ask it more about private versus public markets.
Sure.
But before we get to there, let's talk about technology. As someone that started an online community for seniors and is actively working to integrate technology into the aging process, what role do you see technology taking in senior living, care, and security?
So technology is interesting. So in fall of 2019, I wrote a paper, a new perspective on aging. So it was interesting. So initially, the industry of senior housing back in 2019 was cautious, I would say, on the one hand, in the sense that they weren't so sure like if and how technology belonged in the building. And I remember when I left Sunrise Senior Living in roughly 2004, Paul Clausen was part of my interviews as I was leaving the company. And, I said to him, Paul, what is your take on technology? And he said, Meredith, at the very best, we're always going to be, he said surrogate daughters, but when I put it on paper, the editor said I had to say surrogate children. So he had said to me, like, people move into senior housing because we are like surrogate daughters. We were going to take care of them as a daughter would. Right. And he didn't really see a space and a place for technology. And I, at the time, was like, I don't know. In my mind, it was like, maybe there's a way for technology to play a role so that the people who are caring for those that are residing in the building could do so better and more efficiently. Right. So there was initially this question of, is it technology going to supplant the human touch, human connection that was so valuable, that as an industry we were selling? Fast forward in 2019, about 15 years later, it was happening in the buildings. Right. And I wrote about this. I called it technology, GEE, because I would go as a consultant to some leading owners, operators, and developers at the time, I would go visit those that were getting the accolades for doing something interesting with technology. And I'd go into the building and I was like, oh, I'm so excited to see this like setup where you can contact and connect with physicians when you're living here, but need to go somewhere else, and you can connect and get the support that you need outside the building without leaving the building. How interesting and extraordinary that could be. And I'd go into the room and like, I'd look at the setup and I'm like, wait a second, this computer, and it wasn't a laptop, is not even plugged in.
Right.
So I said to those that were touring me at the time, I said, just help me clarify, like, what is the setup and the structure? How does this work? And he said, we had a provider, but it wasn't a sufficient provider. So now we're looking for a new provider. So we're not really offering the service. So I think there was the desire to do something, but the execution, frankly, was flawed. It just hadn't yet developed. The game changer was COVID, right? In 2020, the industry was left with no choice. The industry was left with no choice because we're still dealing with this now. We have labor challenges with just not enough people in this country to care for people that are getting older sufficiently. And then you had a supply chain of all that you needed in terms of supplies and extra supplies during COVID. And since COVID, that was challenged. So you had to do that much more efficiently. And then you had, how do you connect and communicate with the caregivers and the families outside that can't come into the building, but need and want to know all that's happening inside of the building to their loved one. So the industry was forced really to come up with and distribute solutions. And I remember in 2019, I was a consultant to IN2L. And they had introduced a tablet, and their expectations, how it was going to be sold into the industry, hadn't yet been realized. And I was brought in by one of their board members to help with the adoption of this. And I remember touring various different communities and sites where the technology was, and the technology didn't work so well. So I went back and I was like, we need to improve this. It has to function at a high level consistently for it to be valuable. And we have to put it in the hands of the right staff, people sufficiently trained, and to the right residents that can handle the device and use it as it is intended. Like, that's a lot of complexity, but it was resolved. Like, one, they worked through it. The company is extraordinary. And actually, they hit like an all-time high in the deployment of those devices during COVID, where people couldn't get out of their rooms and the residents had access through these tablets. So the industry was forced to do something. So now they are doing something, and there's no going back.
There isn't. And I'll tell you, it's you touched on it earlier with regards to the labor shortages. It doesn't matter if you're in the assisted living private space or if you're in the home care, nursing home public space, everybody is going to incorporate some level of remote support to be able to complement and assist the shrinking labor force, to be able to still provide high quality service outcomes. But I will say, in we offer a service, residential services, which is similar to like a group home model, and we've been incorporating technology slowly over the course of this year and half of last year. And what we've realized is people, once they're comfortable with knowing that this technology is there to help them, it's not there to have any type of nefarious like monitoring, surveillance, and all that other stuff, they actually feel a lot better about the care that they receive. That was great. Something, and it's something that I really wasn't expecting, because I was expecting it to be more of a kind of like what you described prior to 2019 when you were talking to your old boss. Like it was like, no, this is a one-on-one human to human contact forever and ever. But how does that saying go? Necessity is the father of invention, or invention is the father of necessity.
Is the father. And listen, as an industry, we have to adapt and evolve with those that we serve, because when I started in this industry 20 years ago, it's a very different population of person that's coming into these buildings today.
Right.
And so I know for Vitality Society, I was also very concerned when we launched, because like, people going to be able to figure out Zoom? Is this something that is it going to require substantial infrastructure for us as a company to be able to support older people being on Zoom? And I remember my husband, who has a technology background, he said, do it, they'll learn. And I looked at him like, do it, they'll learn. I was like, okay, there's a lot between do it and they'll learn that I have to do right.
Right.
But like, he was right. Like we made some adjustments early on. And I felt that if we can communicate with consistency and frequency and give people what they need before they even need it, then we'll be able to solve this problem that I thought we would face, which was a lot of anxiety and uncertainty about it. But I had to make some decisions along the way. Like, one area is we don't have people log in to Zoom every time they come onto a Zoom, because our average super user, those that are subscribing at the top of our usage pattern, are coming on 5 hours a week. And so to be able to do that 5 times a week, it's not a great customer experience. So we have been, I would say, more lax on the taking attendance technically, in terms of looking at logs that we were getting, because people are signing in so we could see it. Because I said to myself, I'd rather people be comfortable and connected more freely and easily than me be able to measure how often they're coming. Because if they're comfortable connecting and accessing, they're going to come. And if I make it really difficult and demanding to get in, they're not. So, there are trade-offs, and those are some of the things you have to do as an entrepreneur.
And you may have answered this question earlier, but can you give us more of like a pinpoint specific view with regards to how you solve the issue of social isolation, feeling disconnected from your community? Because you have a unique approach to doing it, so that it also provides fulfillment and purpose to the individuals that use your service.
So what we've tried to do is organize our community building around affinity towards content that we offer. So what I mean by that is, Friday morning, we have a women that do word games group. And these are some of the most extraordinarily accomplished women that their vocabularies are extraordinary. They've taught at the college level. They've been deans of universities, like just really remarkable women. And they have found connection and camaraderie doing something that they love that they would otherwise do alone. And so we've done that on so many dimensions, whether it be fashion classes, makeup classes, art classes, solo ager programs. So we have created content that aggregates a number of people who have a shared interest. And that has been my philosophy. I feel like I can accomplish connection through content. And we have, in the last, it'll be 4 years in January, dabbled in and explored, well, what happens if we just had a discussion group? Like, come here and we're just going to talk. And what was interesting, not many people wanted to show up. And I was fascinated by that. I thought to myself, the essence of socialization is just being in the right place at the right time, and the rest will follow. But these people, even during COVID, maybe a handful of people would show up. But if I did a program on nutrition with a leading expert who ran nutrition at Dana-Farber, or I did a program on fashion with someone who styled many stars and reporters and news anchors, et cetera, people came, 50 people.
Yeah.
10 times the number. So it was remarkably different. So I said, what? We don't need to be everything to everyone. People want to show up because they have a desire to learn. And that goes back to that self-actualization, right? They have a desire to accomplish and know, and we facilitate them learning.
Well, and I think a lot of times we forget that these individuals have lived for a very long time And we think that, you don't have to build value, that, you can just market to them and they're just going to buy it, right? Or they're going to attend. But that's the completely wrong way of
Wrong.
handling it and approaching it. You have to be able to create value. You have to be able to, because they're getting marketed to all the time by like everybody and their brother and their sister and grandma. I mean, everybody markets to individuals over the age of 65. So I think the fact that you said, okay, I need to actually create value and bring on people that are experts in their industry and put out a product that, that I would want to attend.
That's
And
right.
and you've had success with that. So
We've had success with that. And then the hardest part for me is to constantly be finding those really interesting and exciting people.
yes.
We've had some really great programming. Like we had a society photographer who taught our members how to take a great picture and be in a great picture, right? And like we all posed with our chins a certain way. And like,
Yeah.
it was really great. And then we did a whole program with a leading physician on like facial fitness, where you don't have to go and get injections and implants and everything to look your best. So we did all of these like facial exercises, led by this doctor who's done considerable research in this area. And then we wrapped that series up with like your makeup. And so anyway, so it's kind of, I try to make it fun. Like my mom, as I said, she teaches our art history, and she likes to open some of her programs with like music of the times, right? And I'm preparing to teach at NYU, and she's like, Meredith, you need to go in with like our music, right? Like that gets everybody excited and invested. You need to make this fun, So I was trapped, and I mean that in a very positive way, at home with my parents and my husband and my daughter during COVID. So I had like an in-house advisor, right? So my mom really inspires me. And if it like doesn't pass her test, we don't even try.
Meredith, throughout your career and the creation of Vitality Society, what do you see as the greatest challenge we have yet to address for our next generation of elders? And what do you believe is the first step to facing that challenge?
The challenge we haven't faced or we haven't addressed all that well. I'm starting to believe that it's this management of chronic disease. Because I see with my dad, he had 2 rare blood diseases. He had 2 blood cancers, and knock on wood, he's doing great, right?
Great.
And this is something that with the evolution and innovation in healthcare, older people are going to live longer lives. And I don't think as a country, we're prepared for this. I know as caregivers, we're not, right? What resources are available to older people, frankly, of all income levels, right? That now people have to learn how to care for themselves and take better care of themselves, because you want to live long and die fast, right? Like that's the goal. I mean, it happened like truly when my grandfathers passed away, and my grandmothers too. My grandfathers died. One was 68, one was 72. They both had heart attacks. It was over. Like we didn't even know they were sick, because I don't even know that they knew that they were sick. I mean, we knew that they had like a heart issue, but it wasn't like a heart problem. They didn't have like multiple surgeries with stents and other medications that were going to keep them alive for decades. It was over. And both my grandmothers passed away about 2 decades after them. And they lived very long, complete lives, and really just passed away pretty quickly. Like it was very sudden. It's very sad, but it was quick. And when I saw my father be so sick for so long, and the toll it took on my mom emotionally and me, to try to track and do everything for him at a distance, like it was brutal. So I think the challenge that we're facing is this new longevity comes with complexity, both on caregivers, but also an opportunity and an obligation for older people to take better care of themselves.
Yeah.
Because nobody, and you'll hear it from our members and every other circle of people, nobody wants to be a burden and nobody wants to be sick. So if you don't want to be a burden and you don't want to be sick, well, the only thing you could do is take better care of yourself. And so that is my next chapter. I have to go back to my roots and say, I started with food as medicine. And I know decades later, we're so much further along, and we could really inspire this next generation to continue to take even better care of themselves. So the system, which is never going to be a perfect, complete one, is not so strained and taxed for as long as it's going to be, because there's just not enough resources to take care of the people that are going to be sick and old.
Yeah. So we always like to end the show with a call to action.
Yes. And on a high note, Kosta.
And a high note. That's right. This comes as no surprise, but we're all getting older every day. What's one thing, whether it's short-term or long-term, we can all start doing today to make our senior years as fulfilling and as enjoyable as possible?
That's a great question. I think surround yourself with people you love, right? To foster connections that are meaningful with your family, with your community, in terms of through religious organizations or volunteering, your children's school, you go back to school, like connect with other people, because you're going to need to lean on these people, whether it's your family or the community that becomes like family. Often I think about this a lot. Like, I drop my daughter off at school and I like to call my mom. And then I have like a few closest friends that I call, and we're all around the same age and going through various things at various times. But like, there's nothing that's more valuable to me to have people who I've known for a while, who I care for and care about me. And we're here for each other, right? Like, things are not always easy. They're not always going to work out, but despite that, you have people to lean on, and that's really important. So I do believe continuing to have those connections and continuing to invest in building and sustaining that social circle. And I don't mean it like people to eat with or go to theater with. I mean, that's an element of it, but people you can count on that can count on you. And I think that those relationships, no matter what your socioeconomic level is, I think are going to be really meaningful. I go visit my husband's family in Brazil, and it's in many ways, he has an Italian family. His father's one of 10. His mother is one of 4. Most of the family, like 95% of them, live within like a few miles apart. And there's something pretty extraordinary that when my husband's grandmother is not doing so well, because she's now, I always joke, she's never 90, but I think she is actually 90 now. I've known him for so long, but like, she has so many children, and they have children, and she has sisters and they have children. She is always supported and nurtured. And when they say, oh, maybe you move into their equivalent of a nursing home, like, she's never going to get the same care as she would moving into her daughter's house with her nieces and nephews and grandchildren and great-grandchildren coming and going, right? Absolutely. So I do believe that going back to some of the basics and trying to either do that with family or people who are like family is very valuable.